Good morning, good morning. It is 5:30 on a Sunday morning. We are recording. I'm going to spritz these watercolors real quick so that they're nice and juicy later on. Welcome to another episode of Sketch and Coffee Live. You know what? My spritzer's out of water. Welcome to another episode of Sketch and Coffee Live, where we take a toy out of a random object, out of the Random Object Randomogrifier, and we draw and sketch it while we talk about it. We're doing a little quick ink and wash these days. Today we have a mastodon skull rather. And I spent quite a bit of time yesterday figuring out the difference between mastodons and mammoths and heffalumps and woozles. And it turns out there is quite a bit of difference. I didn't think there was that much difference. It turns out there is quite a bit of difference. I knew they were contemporaries, but I thought they were more in competition with each other. And it turns out that is not the case. They are quite different in their habitat and their diet. And so let's talk about that today. First, we can talk about how we know that they're different habitats and diet. Because their teeth. They are named after the teeth. Hey, Ivy. You made it in a long time before the dancing. But they are named after their teeth. Their teeth literally means breast tooth. Mastodon, like a mastectomy. Mastodon. The odon part means tooth. The mast part refers to the fact that the structure in the molars looks like, to the hard-up scientists that were studying them, it resembled breasts. Because when I look at it, it doesn't look like breasts. I wonder if maybe they've ever actually seen breasts. But that's neither here nor there. But the scientist who named them said, well, this looks like breasts. These lumps, they have two mounds on either side of their molar in rows along their molar, as opposed to the mammoths and the elephants. Mammoths and elephants have rows that look like running shoes. And so they're quite different. The rows that look like running shoes of mammoths and elephants are well adapted to grinding up grasses and other type of vegetation off the ground. But the type of tooth that the mastodons had, with its little breast tooth, is more adapted to bark, trees. And so the thinking is that the mastodons, and keep in mind, I really don't like when they just say, this is it, this is fact, this is how it was, we know this to be true. Some of this stuff is, of course, conjecture, because we've never, we have no, it's not like we can go out and look at the mastodons and say, hey, what are y'all doing for food these days? Some of it's conjecture. But we know with the shape of the tooth, we know there are animals alive today that still have that shape of a tooth. And we know what they eat. But here's the kicker. Mastodons died recently enough that we can find lots and lots and lots of fossils of them. And so we find them frozen in the tundra with the contents still in their stomach. And it turns out that they're pretty accurate with their description of what they ate. Which means that they didn't compete with the mammoths. Because the mammoths would eat the grasses off the plains, and the mastodons would eat what was in the trees. Now that brings you to another problem. The area that the mastodons were in is not as cold as where the mammoths were. They're not as cold natured as the mammoths. There's a series of Ivy says there's a series of mastodon statues all around the city near where I live that several years ago were commissioned to be painted by local artists because that's their team mascot. Oh yeah. Yeah, they did that with the bison in Oklahoma City. But these guys were not as cold weather adapted as mammoths were. And so the hypothesis is that they when the glaciation would retreat, the mastodons would move down south, or move up north rather, and take over. And when the ice came back, when the ice ages would return, because there were several, the mammoths would take over, and the mastodons would be pushed way down south, down into Florida and the like. And with a diet of primarily conifer trees that rapidly ran out, these guys would eat everything. They have a long, low skull. I'm trying to not give it a lumpy skull like an elephant, because their skull would be long and low. My problem right now is I've got too many lines. Look how that eraser, I need to take care of some of these lines, but look how that eraser looks like a notification bell, like if you were to click a notification bell to get notified when I was online. It's funny how these things take shapes like that when you're not paying attention. But I need to get rid of some of these excess lines because it's starting to confuse me, and I'm starting to try to shade in and correct form on stuff that shouldn't be there in the first place. So I'm just going to go through here real quick, knock out some of these extra lines. I'll take all that eye socket stuff back out. I want to start fresh on there. Because where that comes in should be right like that. Is this an eye socket or is this a sinus socket? I think this is the sinus socket. I think the eye sockets are way back over here. Anyway, that should be quite a bit longer. Like that. Yeah, that's more like it. That solved a whole lot of that problem. All right. How are we doing on time? Oh, good Lord, it's already 5:41. We're already 10 minutes into this. So we got the composition and the detail work done just in time. But yeah, the really cool thing about, to me, the really cool thing about mammoths and mastodons is how we have such fresh fossils. They're recent enough in history that we can actually get samples of DNA off of them. And we can compare their mitochondrial DNA to living animals like elephants, African elephants, Asian elephants. Mastodons are more closely related to Asian elephants than to African elephants. And I think that's fascinating. The family of mastodons. You know what I said mastodons? I meant mammoths. Mammoths are more closely related to Asian elephants. Mastodons aren't very closely related to any of them because the family of mastodons split off some 25 to 30 million years ago. Mammoths and elephants differentiated only about 7 million years ago, and that's when the Asian elephants differentiated from the African elephants. And then a little less than a million years ago, or a little more than a million years ago, mammoths differentiated from Asian elephants. Which is wild to me. If you're not familiar with mitochondrial DNA is passed on by your mother. I did spray my watercolors. Thank you, Ivy. I did spritz my watercolors. Mitochondrial DNA is passed on by your mother, unchanged. That's how they can use mitochondrial DNA to test stuff, because regular old cell DNA is different than mitochondrial DNA. Almost as though mitochondrial was a parasite that just now lives inside your body. It has a different set of DNA than your cellular DNA. And mitochondrial DNA, it sounds like I'm just saying it over and over and over, comes from your mother, unchanged. Every man has his mother's mitochondrial DNA. Every woman, every female has her mother's mitochondrial DNA. It passes down through the eggs, through the ovaries, all throughout generations. And the only thing that changes that is whatever mutations happen along the way. And it turns out that those mutations can happen at pretty regular intervals that we can measure. And it gives them a pretty good estimate as to when stuff happened, how many generations it might have been, how closely related certain populations are to other populations. Now, again, going back to what I said earlier, I really don't like it when they say this is how it is and that's that, the science is settled. Because anybody who's ever said the science is settled doesn't science. Because they find out stuff every day that yesterday they had a completely different idea about. Every day that happens. So, the mitochondrial DNA of these things, though, is different enough that they have to go all the way back to fossils found in a geological event 30-something million years ago in Africa to find something even closely related. Can't talk, Artie. See, and I've said this before, a huge part of me really wants to just leave it like that. I really just like that look. There's a really huge part of me that just really likes that look right there. Maybe when we start the next book, that's what we'll do. Maybe when we start the next book, we'll just do limited palette. I mean, it's my sketch. I can do what I want. I can follow whatever rules I want because it's my sketch. But I think in this book we dedicated to color. We've already started using color. We've already kind of dedicated ourselves to color. But there's a huge part of me that really just likes to leave it just like this. So where were we? What were we talking about? Mastodons. Anybody remember where we were? Their relationship to heffalumps. So it turns out they're not very related. Then they want to know, oh, it's 5:50. We got to start wrapping this up. Then they want to know what happened to them. Let me dry this real quick. And then we'll come back and add some color and talk about what happened to them. Hang on just a minute. Let me hit that with some hot air. Woo! Because I love watching paint dry. There's nothing more exciting to me than watching paint dry. I wake up every day wishing I could run downstairs and watch paint dry. One of my favorite things in the whole wide world. So excited. I think that's kind of good. So Mastodon died off somewhere around somewhere around 9,000–10,000 years ago. And it coincides with the time they think that the humans came to the Americas. And so all of the books say, oh, this is what caused it. And this gets back to what I was saying a while ago. I really hate when they do that. I really hate when they just say, this is absolutely the cause of that, because it only explains what happened in one area. It doesn't explain the megafauna dying off all over the rest of the planet, where the humans had already been for a very long time. So it's easy to say the humans in the Americas caused this, but it's not responsible to say it, because it doesn't explain, to me, it doesn't explain what happened to the megafauna in Eurasia. It doesn't explain why the megafauna all over the world died off at about the same time. And that's important. It's not enough to say this is what caused it and just be done with it, say the science is settled. It's important to say this meets all of the requirements to explain everything that happened. And this does not meet all the requirements to explain everything that happened.
How about that? Can you hear me now? I guess my microphone died. Anyway, I don't know where you left off. There's my mom. Where'd we leave off? Where'd we lose sound? Have I been dead this whole time? Oh my goodness. That's crazy. So, what was the last thing you heard? I feel your pain, Mom. My mom's been down with back pain. Talking about how they died off. Right, so climate change weakened them because every time it got warmer, the herds would move south. I'm sorry, the herds would move north up into the Canadian area, and every time it got cooler, they would move south, and every time it got warmer, they would move north. And this went back and forth, but every time it did, the plains increased, and these guys are arboreal. They lived in the trees, and not up in the trees like birds, but they lived in the woods. And they wouldn't cross the plains. So their habitat kept shrinking every time the glaciation would come back and then recede. Their habitat kept shrinking. Then the humans come along. But they had to be well on their way out for that to have worked out, for that to have happened, because we still have moose, we still have bison, we still have some of the megafauna, and those things were hunted just as frequently, if not more easily, than mastodons. And there's not a whole lot of evidence of mastodons. We're running a little late today. There's not a whole lot of evidence of mastodons having been hunted by the humans. So it doesn't make as much sense to say the humans killed the mastodons off. What is today, the 8th? 08 of June. But there is one very interesting discovery in Southern California, where they found mastodon skulls, fossils had been cut apart by humans some 100,000 years ago. And the stone tools that they used and the markings on the bones are there, and the geological formation is about 100,000 years ago, and that has got them really shocked, because that says that there were people in the Americas 100,000 years earlier than they thought there were people in the Americas, which just goes to show that humans came to the Americas many, many times. But it is an interesting discovery. It'd be even more interesting if it plays out, because now they're trying to map off the coast of California, and they're trying to look for, they have a new technique where they can look for settlement deposits under the ocean. So I'll be curious to see how that works, because some of the things they're using seem questionable to me, but the evidence supports what they're finding. So that's pretty cool. But that's one of the few instances in the Americas where they have evidence of the humans hunting the mastodons. Over on the east coast and down the river valley, there's not much evidence at all of humans hunting the mastodons. So the idea that the humans hunted them to extinction doesn't really play out to the evidence. Anyway, that's my take on it. Go research it yourself and let us know in the comments below what you come up with. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Let's see what we ended up with. I've completely forgot. I got carried away talking about mastodons and extinction, and I completely forgot to show off the finished product there. So I think we got a pretty nice little illustration. I hope that didn't cause any problems. I just pulled my camera off my cables too quickly. It didn't mean to, but that's what happened. Alright, let's see here. Alright, this is what we have for the two of them. So guys, thank you so much for joining me. You know, I look forward to this every morning. This is my chance to get my art on with my art buddies, and I do look forward to it every day. Thank you so much for joining me. Be sure and tune in tomorrow. Same Artistic Biker time, same Artistic Biker channel. I have a goldfish for tomorrow, so we'll see how that plays out. And I've got a lot to learn about goldfish, which is fun because I have the memory of a goldfish swimming around in a bowl. I've never been here before. What's this? Oh look, a castle. Anyway guys, this is when we dance. We dance until somebody says they see me dancing, and then once somebody says they see me dancing, we know that the lag has caught up with the stream, and I don't have to worry about